unlocked her phone 10 times that night. Not to call for help, not to call his family, not to call anyone at all. Just to unlock it, check it, put it down, pick it up again, while her husband lay dying in the bedroom at the end of the hall. Eric Richins was 39 years old. He had spent the day with his 3 boys. He had eaten dinner at the table he built with his own hands, in the home he had worked his entire adult life to provide. And sometime after dinner, he drank the Moscow Mule his wife made for him. By morning, he was dead. The official cause of death was fentanyl toxicity, 5 times the lethal dose found in his system. 5 times. In a man with no history of drug use. In a man whose only exposure to fentanyl that night was a drink his wife handed him in his own kitchen.
My husband passed away unexpectedly last year, so it's March 4th was a 1 year.
And while investigators quietly began pulling at the threads of Eric's death, Kouri Richins was writing a book. A children's book, about grief, about losing a parent. She dedicated it to their 3 sons. She went on morning television to promote it. She smiled for the cameras. She spoke about loss and healing and helping children process pain. She was composed. She was warm. She was convincing. She had been planning Eric's death for years. This is the story of Eric Richins, of the life he built, the family he loved, and the night everything he trusted was used against him. And it is the story of how his wife nearly got away with it. Hi everyone and welcome back. Today we are looking at a case out of Kamas, Utah, a small mountain town where Eric Richins lived, worked, and raised his family. A case involving fentanyl, 6 life insurance policies, 2 suspicious cash payments, and a children's grief book that became one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. This is the Kouri Richins case, and we are going to start from the very beginning. Eric Lyle Richins was born and raised in Utah. He was the kind of man people describe the same way every time. Hardworking, generous, the first one to show up when someone needed help, and the last to ask for anything in return. He worked in construction and real estate. Over years of consistent work, he had built a stable life for his family in Kamas, a Summit County town of a few thousand people tucked into the Wasatch Mountains, surrounded by ski resorts and national forests, and the kind of quiet that people move to Utah specifically to find. He and Kouri had been together for years. They married in 2013. They had 3 sons together, young boys, who by every account adored their father. Eric was present, coaching Little League, showing up to every school event. The kind of dad whose children knew without question that they were his priority. His friends remembered a man who laughed easily and trusted completely. A man who believed in the people around him, sometimes more than they deserved. He loved the mountains. He loved his boys. He loved the life he had built from nothing. From the outside, the Richins family had everything. A beautiful home, a growing business, a community of people who respected and liked them both. But beneath the surface of that picture, something had been wrong for years. And Eric Richins had no idea. Kouri Richins was a real estate agent, ambitious, polished, visible in the community. She maintained an active social media presence, posting photos of the family, the home, the life they had together. By all outward appearances, she was a successful businesswoman and a devoted mother. But behind that image, Kouri had been making financial decisions that were quietly dismantling everything Eric believed their life was built on. Investigators would later uncover a financial picture significantly darker than anything visible from the outside. There was debt, hidden obligations, a financial pressure that had been building for years, and that, by 2022, had reached a point of genuine desperation. And then there was the insurance. Between 2018 and 2022, Kouri had taken out 6 separate life insurance policies on Eric Richins. 6 policies, over 4 years, incrementally, quietly. The total payout, if Eric died, approximately $1.9 million. Eric did not know about most of them. That detail, 6 policies, taken out over 4 years, without his full knowledge, would become the spine of the prosecution's entire case, because it told a story not of impulse, but of planning. Deliberate, patient, methodical planning that stretched back years before the night Eric died. There were other signs the marriage was in serious trouble. Eric had at some point consulted with a divorce attorney. There were arguments about money, tensions about the direction of their lives together. But Eric stayed. Because of the boys. Because he believed things could be fixed. Because he was, by every account from every person who knew him, a man who did not give up on the people he loved. That loyalty would cost him his life. And there was something else, something that would only emerge after Eric was gone, and investigators began looking more closely at his wife. Kouri had been in contact with a drug dealer. Text messages recovered from her phone showed communications regarding the purchase of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid so potent that a dose measured in milligrams is enough to kill a grown adult. Investigators also identified two separate cash payments of $900 each made to an acquaintance in the period before Eric's death. The amount found in Eric's system at the time of his death was 5 times the lethal dose. That is not a miscalculation. That is not an accident. That is a quantity that leaves almost no room for any interpretation other than intent. But on the night of the 18th of February 2022, none of that was known yet. On that night, Eric Richins came home to his family. It was a Friday evening. Eric had been with his boys. By all accounts, it was an ordinary night, the kind of ordinary that had been the entire architecture of the life he had spent years building. At some point that evening, Kouri made him a Moscow Mule. A Moscow Mule is vodka, ginger beer, and lime juice served in a copper mug. It is a drink with a strong and complex enough flavor profile to mask almost anything added to it. The copper mug itself makes visual inspection of the liquid inside nearly impossible. Eric drank it. The effects of fentanyl at 5 times the lethal dose would have come on quickly, within minutes. A heaviness, a sedation so complete it would have felt, from the inside, like falling asleep. The body's respiratory system beginning to slow, the brain losing its signal to keep breathing. Eric went to bed. He did not wake up. At some point in the hours that followed, Kouri unlocked her phone 10 times, not to call 911, not to call Eric's family. The records would later show she checked her phone repeatedly during the window in which the fentanyl was doing what it was designed to do. In the early hours of the 18th of February, 2022, Kouri called 911. She reported that her husband was unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived at the home in Camas. Eric Richins was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 39 years old. The initial cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. In those first hours, there was nothing to immediately indicate foul play. A 39-year-old man had died unexpectedly in his sleep. It was devastating. It was shocking to the community that knew and loved him. But it was not yet a murder investigation. The toxicology results would change everything. When the full toxicology screen came back, the finding was unambiguous. Eric Richins had fentanyl in his system at a concentration 5 times the amount required to cause death in an adult male of his size and weight. That finding opened a criminal investigation. And as investigators began to look more closely at the life Kouri had been living, behind the image she maintained so carefully, the picture that emerged was not one of a tragic accident. It was the picture of a murder that had been planned across 4 years. The investigation into Eric Richins' death was led by the Utah Division of Criminal Investigation, working alongside the Summit County Attorney's Office. What they built across the 14 months between Eric's death and Kouri's arrest was a case assembled from multiple independent streams of evidence, each one significant on its own, together forming something that would prove nearly impossible to argue against in court. The first stream was the insurance. 6 separate life insurance policies taken out on Eric Richins between 2018 and 2022. A combined payout of approximately $1.9 million. Most of them taken out without Eric's full knowledge. The pattern incremental, spread across years, quietly accumulated, told investigators this was not spontaneous financial planning. Whatever Kouri had been building toward, she had been constructing its financial foundation since at least 2018. The second stream was the phone. Text messages recovered from Kouri's device showed communications with an individual connected to fentanyl supply. The timing of those messages, in the weeks and months before Eric's death, placed the acquisition of the drug squarely within the window of planning. Investigators also documented Kouri unlocking her phone 10 times during the period that night when the fentanyl was active in Eric's system. No calls were made, no messages sent. She was monitoring something. The third stream was the financial forensics. Investigators identified two separate cash payments of $900, each made by Kouri to an acquaintance in the period before Eric's death. The source and purpose of those payments would become a central focus of the prosecution's argument about how the fentanyl was obtained. The fourth stream was the search history. Recovered from Kouri's devices were searches relating to fentanyl dosage, specifically how to calculate a lethal amount based on a person's body weight. This was not a curious search. This was a technical search, conducted with a specific outcome in mind. The fifth stream was the book. In early 2023, 14 months after Eric's death, while the investigation was quietly ongoing, Kouri Richins self-published a children's book titled, Are You With Me? The book was written as a resource for children who had lost a parent. It was dedicated to her 3 sons. She promoted it actively. She appeared on local morning television programs. She gave interviews about grief and healing and what it means to help children process loss. She was articulate. She was compassionate. She was performing. Investigators were watching every appearance, every interview, every camera appearance by a woman they were building a murder case against. The book would later be cited by prosecutors as evidence of Kouri's extraordinary capacity for sustained deception. A woman who had allegedly poisoned her husband was now positioning herself publicly as an authority on surviving loss. She was monetizing the grief she had manufactured. In the spring of 2023, investigators executed search warrants on the Richins property and across Kouri's digital records. What they recovered confirmed what 14 months of investigation had built toward. On May 8, 2023, Kouri Richins was arrested at her home in Kamas, Utah. She was charged with aggravated murder and 3 counts of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Her bail was initially set at $1 million. It was later increased to $10 million after prosecutors successfully argued she posed a flight risk, a woman with access to financial resources, a passport, and every reason in the world to run. She did not run. She maintained her innocence. And the case proceeded to trial. The trial of Kouri Richins began in Summit County, Utah, in late 2024. It was one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in the state's recent history, a case that had drawn national attention from the moment of her arrest and that had only grown more extraordinary as the specific details of the evidence emerged in open court. The prosecution built their case methodically and without drama. They presented the insurance policies, 6 of them, taken out over 4 years, $1.9 million, most of them without Eric's full knowledge. They presented the toxicology evidence, 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl, in a man with no history of drug use, in a man whose only consumption that evening was a drink made by his wife. They presented the text messages, the communications about fentanyl, the 2 $900 cash payments, the timeline that placed the drug acquisition in the weeks before Eric's death. They presented the search history, the searches about lethal fentanyl doses based on body weight. They presented the phone data, unlocked 10 times during the window Eric was dying, no calls made. And then they presented the book, Are You With Me? A children's grief book, written by the woman who allegedly caused the grief, promoted on morning television by the woman who allegedly poisoned the father. Those children were grieving. The defense argued that the death was accidental, that Eric had been involved in drug use Kouri did not know about, that the insurance policies were legitimate financial planning, that the text messages were misinterpreted, that a loving mother and grieving wife was being prosecuted for a tragedy she had nothing to do with. The jury considered all of it. On March 2026, after weeks of testimony and evidence presented across multiple courtroom sessions, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty. Kouri Richins was convicted of aggravated murder in the death of her husband, Eric Richins. The woman who wrote the grief book had been found guilty of causing the grief herself. The conviction of Kouri Richins landed in the small community of Kamas, Utah, with the weight of something that had been suspended for 4 years finally coming to rest. Eric's family, who had never accepted that his death was anything other than what the toxicology report suggested, who had pushed quietly and persistently for answers from the beginning, released a statement that spoke not about justice or closure, but about Eric himself, about who he was, about the boys he left behind, about the specific and irreplaceable shape of the hole his absence had created in their lives. His 3 sons were young when their father died on February 18th, 2022. They are older now. They have grown up inside a story that no child should ever have to live inside. They lost their father to a crime. They lost their mother to a conviction. They received a children's book about grief, written by the person who caused their grief and dedicated to them by name. What those 3 boys carry now, and will carry for the rest of their lives, is the full weight of what Kouri Richins chose to do on an ordinary Friday evening in their family home. "Are You With Me?" was pulled from circulation after Kouri's arrest. The copies that remain in existence are documents of something almost impossible to fully comprehend. A mother writing about loss for her children, while under investigation for manufacturing that loss herself. Kouri Richins faced sentencing following her March 2026 conviction. Under Utah law, aggravated murder carries the possibility of life in prison without the possibility of parole. She had unlocked her phone 10 times while Eric was dying. She had taken out 6 insurance policies he did not know about. She had bought fentanyl, calculated the dose, put it in his drink, and then spent 14 months performing grief for anyone who would watch. Eric Richins was a father, a son, a friend, a man who built his life with his hands and loved his boys with everything he had. He trusted her completely. He should not have. He deserved to come home. If you found this case as devastating as I did, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for new true crime documentaries every week. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering Eric.